Morning. So, what's this about? Well, I'm going to tell a story about Dave the Tremendous, a one-shot that I had with a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine. And, well, I was 11th level with infinite magic items. So, naturally, I was a chronologist wizard, but a nice little build called the Articron, a one-level dip in Artificer, the rest of the way chronologist wizard, and that is where I will start my story. It started off pretty simple. I was walking through the town, a new town, because my character just loves to explore. He is a chaotic little crazy guy. And so, I was walking through the town when I wanted to go see, well, the middle of the town, which supposedly was where the noble was. This town, strangely enough, wasn't that advanced when I heard stories that it would be. So, it was more of a farm town. No walls, no nothing. But when I got to the front doorstep of the noble's home, I'll say, a letter apparated right in front of me. And, well, I read it. It was a very, very nice letter that, simply put, said that they needed my help with some sort of unknown threat that they could not tell me about. It was being messaged by a woman that I forget her name of. I'll call her Martha, because I know it started with an M. So then what I did was, being this very skeptical wizard I was, I simply hid and sent my familiar over to see what was what, right? A familiar, of course. An owl. An owl was flying overhead. Nothing seemed that bad. So, I just walked up and teased the guards a little bit, testing their limits, and they were actually very strict. So, after a few interesting conversations, I went in. They, of course, did not allow me to, well, take people I was traveling with. I had a golem, a clay golem, specifically. No, a stone golem. It was a stone golem. So, naturally, I was not happy about that. But I went for it, because I was, at this point, very curious. And so, I went inside. And it was a very, very hard way of an underground maze where I was slowly going deeper underground. And I could detect all sorts of magic around me. And I could tell that we were going underground because of my keen mind feat that I had, which allows me to remember anything that I see, and the direction that north is, and the time of day that it is. And then, once I actually got to the throne room, there sat an old man and his advisor, a sorcerer that had a very I guess professional stance. She was very interesting, with black hair, blue eyes, kind of like an anime girl type situation. And she had an orb floating in her hand, kind of like her resting state. You will see in the future. And beside her was the noble that was in charge of everything. And well, he looked very lazy. In fact, he barely, what's the word I'm looking for? He barely contributed to the conversation at all. In fact, it was all the advisor that basically communicated everything. So, with me being very suspicious, I asked, well, before we start talking, can we have a Zone of Truth up? I, of course, could have cast Zone of Truth with a wish ring, but thankfully, they were able to provide the Aura of Truth spell. They didn't expect that, but it was probably the best that they didn't. So, they swore me to secrecy before they even told me what it was. In fact, they handed me a contract that implied that I would be killed if I told anyone outside of this room, outside of the people inside this room. If I told them, then they would come for my head, and they would know that I've told someone else about this secret, like how an alarm spell pings in your mind. So, after a very long debate of questions and asking how things will work, I reluctantly signed it because I was very curious. You're gonna get that whole vibe of curious kills the cat. Well, that's me. And so, at least my character. And so, after I signed it, Mary started vigorously telling me about how this occult leader, or at least rumored occult leader, was possibly gaining followers, wanting to become a god. And we had a short discussion about what makes a god. She compared herself to where she has loyal subjects, our loyal subjects. She corrects herself, as the noble was standing right behind her. The crown was the noble's title. And she seemed to feel that she was the one in charge all the time, which, to be fair, she kind of was. But she didn't have that title, so she was always correcting herself. But back to the story that I'm still talking about. So, eventually, we figured out, well, she asked me what makes a god. My character said, perspective. And without any further conversation with that, we went back to the problem at hand. She tasked me to go to the forest where all the people are supposedly disappearing. And when they come back, they act like nothing bad has happened, when clearly they are acting different, but nothing that can be proved. And so, knowing that per signage of the contract, I have to go and at the very least spy on them and come back with information, I do so. I get on my magic carpet, because infinite magic items, and I go. I use my Ring of Wishes I used my Ring of Wishes to cast the spell Legend Lore. Because I have infinite magic items, I have infinite wishes, but I simply used it as a way to cast any spell I needed to. And so, I did that. I cast Legend Lore. What did it say? Well, I cast Legend Lore on the character Dimitri, who they thought was the person that was driving this cult. And when I cast Legend Lore on him, I was brought with memories and a flashback of Dimitri in a wizardry school, and all of the people were nice to him. It was a sort of fake friends thing. He at the time then sort of ascended himself mentally, and therefore detached himself of all masculine identities, thinking that he was truly a god. And so he now referred to himself as they self. And, well, Dimitri was never heard of again, not for a long time. But he is now, because of the Legend Lore, assuming that he was now very interested in the aberrants, and specifically intellect devourers, which are these little brains with feet. Brain feet, if you will. And essentially, they are a very, very dangerous aberrant monster, to where they feed on others' intelligence. And if you are not careful, they could literally teleport into your brain and eat your brain, devour your intellect, hence the name Intellect Devourer. And so, with that in mind, I was super terrified about this, because I knew what Intellect Devourers were. In fact, I could probably summon one, because, well, I had an item for that. So, also, forgot to mention, I cleverly used the guard burst into tears, and she looked at me, asking me, "Where have you been?" And I immediately dropped the illusion, because I knew that she was someone to the guard. And so, after that, the guard and Mary both embraced each other. Sorry guys, a yawn. So they both embraced each other, And, well, they both started crying because this girl was the guard's little sister. And, well, I definitely got a little emotionally invested into this after that. Going back to the forest, I sent my familiar down to see what the heck was going on. And because of a few bad rolls, I was immediately found. Well, my familiar was. But for some reason, a magic missile was sent directly at me. Somehow. And I took a little bit of damage. But then, the guy, Darius, or Darian, whatever I call him, teleported right onto my magic carpet. And that freaked me completely. And so it was too heavy for my carpet, so we started falling. And so thankfully, I was able to cast Featherfall on myself. But then he also cast Featherfall on himself and one of his followers, his petitioners, if you will, on themselves. And then I used Dispel Magic to, well, make them continue falling. And the petitioner, unfortunately, died from it. Darius did not, though. He, in fact, well, I was scared out of my mind, I gotta be honest. And so, because this guy, Dave the Tremendous, was not actually that tremendous. You'll soon find out. The first thing he did was say, "Hey, I don't want to fight you." And he ran. He teleported out of there. He was gone. He did not want any part of that craziness. But before he could, he saw a dark cloud. Just a giant dark cloud of what he could only imagine and describe as the darkness spell, but on a massive scale. And coming out of the building was, coming into view from through the trees, was hundreds of people. All very scary. And I, for one, didn't want any part of it. So I teleported away. I used the teleport spell, had a few mishaps, took a few damage, and I teleported right onto the steps of the noble's house, the noble's mansion. And then I used my ability to teleport straight into their home. And for now, that is part 1. If you want to listen to part 2, I'll be making that one soon. But for now,